Thank you guys for coming out today. Happy to be here. And I'm a substitute, so again, I appreciate you guys bearing with me here. So like Troy said, I'm Kerry Flynn, a marketing reporter at Digiday. And I'm gonna have the panelists introduce themselves and going beyond what they can already read, just tell a little bit more about kind of like what your day-to-day job is at your current companies. Let's start.
All right, I will start. So I'm Kathryn Friedrich. I am the Chief Business Officer at RYOT Studio. I've been with RYOT now almost 3 months. I was coming from a small startup called Thrive Global, and then 10 years in Google, YouTube, and then some banking before that, which is kind of a strange transition from banking to sales to product to content marketing. My day-to-day right now is pretty amazing, especially because I'm new. I am integrating, RYOT is a relatively new addition to the Verizon Oath conglomerate. And we're really working on how to better attract and tell stories that can be heard from our brand marketers that we partner with. So that my day-to-day is sort of all encompassing around that umbrella of inclusion.
So hi, I'm Mike Williams. I am currently the creative director at Mashable, which is a digital media company as well. I'm the creative director on the branded content team function, which is the content team for PC Mag. I'm responsible for the creative output across all of our channels in the branded realm. Prior to Mashable, actually Mashable was the first digital media company I worked for. I come from the advertising background, so I've always been a writer turned creative director at various agencies in Chicago and New York.
Hi, I'm Brendan Gahan. I started a social media agency called Epic Signal. I like to think of our job as helping brands do cool things online. As part of that, we do lots of branded content, influencer marketing, managing brands' own media properties and developing content for them. We work with a lot of Fortune 500 brands, Unilever brands, Ben & Jerry's, a bunch of Miller Coors brands, Alaska Airlines, Mountain Dew, Pepsi, et cetera.
Awesome. And since everyone introduced themselves, disclosure, I used to work at Mashable, but I'm going to try not to play favorites with Mike. And I want to start today talking about really what the title of the panel is. It's pushing the envelope. And when I see that, I'm like, that's kind of cliche, and my boss probably would hate if I ever include that in a story. But I want to talk with you guys about what that really means to you, really define it. Brendan, maybe if we want to start with you. When you hear pushing the envelope, like, what do you think?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it's something that can be interpreted in a lot of ways. But obviously, it's all about defying convention. And I think within advertising, we like to pride ourselves as being unconventional and innovative, but oftentimes we get caught up in a lot of norms and processes and formats that really quickly get established. And these conventions are a little bit of a trap. And so I think it's thinking beyond what everybody else is doing, whether that's a 30-second spot or 6-second spot or 15-second spot, more and more, and pivoting away from what everybody else is doing and kind of carving out your own path.
I think from our and my perspective, pushing the envelope is literally allowing yourself to be creative. I would say a lot of brands, a lot of clients, a lot of companies, a lot of agencies say they're creative, and they entice you with that to come in and work for them, and you're going to create creative work, but it's very few that actually hold that to a standard and actually go out and do it. I know for us, one of the big things is before you even get to the idea, before you get to the work, what is actually pushing the envelope is the relationship that you have with the brand and or client. Knowing that nothing is done, meaning the script, meaning the docu-series, meaning whatever you're putting on the various platforms, nothing is done until it actually pubs, so the idea can change right there on set. And that takes a trust between the agency and the brand that they work with.
Yeah, I mean, I love what you just said. I think everybody has their own personal envelope. RYOT has an envelope that we're pushing, but not everybody's ready to. Not everybody's on the same trajectory of pushing. There are some real traditional brands that pushing the envelope really means just telling a different story. And then in some cases, it's going wildly creative and using new ad formats. And then it could be completely thinking out of the box and launching shuttles into space that, do something outrageous. So, I mean, I think everybody has their threshold of what's uncomfortable. And I think being uncomfortably excited is actually the where we want to live. So at RYOT, we get to work across all of the Oath brands, and we are the end-to-end solution for them. So we're pushing the envelope in all of these different ways with brands, which could be using the new ad format, could be AR, VR, which we've pioneered over the past number of years with filmmaking. It could be entering into a new vertical or a lens or targeting a new market and using data. It could be really thinking out of the box with events and how to tie in their brand story or their purpose and their goals into like consumer interactions. So I think pushing the envelope means something different to our brands, and I think at RYOT we're here to help people explore where those boundaries are.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about RYOT than with you, Kathryn. I remember like when, I guess it was Huffington Post or Oath, or whoever bought it way back when, and when AOL. Yeah. And I know you're new there, but when I remember seeing that, and I'm like, oh wow, that's such like a edgy-ish brand to me, and maybe the name helps with that. But to me at the time, as someone who also used to work under that umbrella, I didn't really. To me, it seemed something interesting and exciting, and to your point of pushing the envelope. So walk me through a little bit more about, is that true? Is it really all about that concept, or is it more traditional?
So the word riot and the way that RYOT got its name was actually from an MLK quote, which was, "A riot is the language of the unheard." So when our founder of RYOT was down in Haiti after the 2010 earthquake, most of the traditional sources of media were talking about the poverty, the tragedy, real devastation that was happening at the time. But because he was with the people, he wasn't there, to make a film. He was there, working on a school. But because he saw such perseverance in people and triumph in people and hope and perspective, he actually wanted to capture those stories and get those voices heard because they were not being heard. So pushing the envelope and the RYOT, the way that RYOT was founded was all around getting those stories heard. And what became known and what RYOT actually had done going forward was start to really try to create those immersive experiences, because people, stories would be sent back from all of these different parts of the world, and no one really appreciated or understood what was going on. So when they first came out with, I think it was like GoPro and all of these different cameras that you could really just connect together, it was the first experience really in VR. And our filmmakers started actually shooting in VR and then bringing them back into different parts of the world to really immerse people in what's really happening. And that was the first foray into a new immersive technology, filmmaking on a level that was kind of more run and gun, which could have been shot, in some cases, editing with a phone camera, because that's how you got that perspective. So I think the history of RYOT and the films division of RYOT really sparked where we went with RYOT Studio, which is really more the advertising brand-focused area of RYOT. Awesome. So we're taking that tradition and history, we're using that like purposeful, actionable creative that we really want to talk to brands with, and giving it that urgency and that relevancy for right now, but also still keeping with, a film quality of beautiful. Yeah. So, between the purposeful, actionable, urgency and beautiful, we're creating that RYOT way that came from our film division and bringing it to our advertisers and brands.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about Mashable, Mike. I remember when I joined, I was like, oh, I love puppy videos. I'm so happy to be here. And I know it's true. I'm not joking. And so, and I know you guys still do a lot of great puppy content and other videos. But like when you kind of look in terms of your role of like actually what the creative is and what really subjects you focus on and stuff like that, what is kind of your day-to-day focus on what you should be creating? Do you run to the puppies or you look elsewhere?
So I don't like dogs.
So this panel's over. So.
No. What I'll say is more than anything, it's important for us to have a point of view. And what we have or what we rest our laurels on is the future. So whether we're talking about something that's 5 seconds away or something that's eons away, we like to take the future and put it into sort of a palatable form that people can understand. So we take complex issues and we simplify them, or we take things that are actually simple and we make them entertaining to you to actually want to watch and be informed in that manner. So I would say the future is our sort of bread and butter. But in terms of, puppies or cats or pandas, like, yeah, sure. we like to do all that stuff. We do it not only in content in the digital form, we do it in experiential, because we really don't separate experiential from what we consider content. It's all creating content. One's on the ground level, one's in the digital platform, but yet all of it is inclusive, and that does include puppies.
Awesome, great, thank you. Well, on the topic of puppies still. No, but when we talk about like viral content and this idea of like, futuristic, and I know, and then sometimes you see headlines of like, whoa, this is the future, and like, sure, it's like eons away and this is never gonna happen, but maybe it's a great story. Maybe Brenda, you wanna talk about this idea of like how in this world you can focus on making sure your story, you're not just creating something for virality's sake, but you're actually telling something cohesive.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we think about pushing the envelope, it's easy to think about something more extreme, and certainly viral content kind of lends itself to that thinking. Unfortunately, oftentimes, there's so much content out there being created. I don't know what the latest stats, but like on YouTube alone, it's like 600 hours of content being uploaded every minute. That's a lot of content. People can't watch it all, so it tends to be some sort of extreme that generally kind of pops off. But that doesn't necessarily like lend itself to being super brand friendly and stuff. And I think from a philosophical standpoint, what we've been trying to do is skew brands away from thinking about that kind of campaign mindset, which doing like a viral video or something like that really is kind of like, in a lot of ways, the digital. It's analogous to like doing a big Super Bowl ad or something like that. Let's put all our eggs in one basket. And I think the thing that we're seeing is instead taking more of like, let's really cultivate a community and build trust over time. That tends to, it's not necessarily as sexy as like getting a big, viral hit that gets 10 million views or something. But I think it's much more sustainable, and I think you build a lot more trust with consumers over time. And I think in general, we're trying to think about how we can do that more and more, and I think that's something that brands have historically kind of struggled with.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad you brought up brand safety, because as someone who went to a lot of new fronts last week, I felt like that was the hot topic, especially among YouTube. And so maybe, Kathryn, if you just want to talk about, especially you guys, like pushing the envelope, being about really personal stories, how do you really make sure, like, at the same time, brands really want to go there and that it's actually brand safe people, no matter who you're talking to, whether it's an influencer or whether it's a casual human on the street?
Yeah, I think we have such an advantage at RYOT because of where we sit within Oath, because by nature, the brands that we distribute against are brand safe. When you think of the portfolio, which were the Yahoo portfolio, the AOL portfolio that kind of came together, they're all brand safe. So we don't have to worry too much about the trust in our distribution of the content. Yeah. And then I think some of the things that we do to help the brands like come along is really identify and use the data. So again, like back to Oath, we have so much first-party data on the consumers that are engaging with all of those different brands. So we actually know who they are, what they're interested in, and so we use kind of a two-part process of looking at the distribution along with the content being created and identifying the white space. So we know what the people want to hear based on some of the like social listening tools that we use. And so we can actually create the perfect target for the perfect message and know that it's going into a brand safe environment because we'll distribute across all of the owned and operated of Oath. So we have an advantage because we're naturally brand safe.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, and like you said, like obviously Oath owns a ton of different channels and brands that are quality. Brendan, I know you work with a bunch of influencers, so I'm curious about them. I mean, we had the last year of a lot of people saying inappropriate things and being
Yeah.
kicked out of a lot of companies. I won't name any names, but I think we all know. So I'm curious about when you work with people like that, there's that of like making sure these individuals stay on brand, but also like how can these creators really push the envelope and fit into that narrative of a brand when they're just people just like us?
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a good question. So in terms of our process and how to work with them, I think first and foremost, we establish what our goals are and then back into the talent. And so we'll, be like, all right, what platform are we trying to reach based on our demo? What's the kind of passion points we want to touch on, and work with the brand to establish a clear kind of criteria and filter, build out a much bigger list of creators than we actually need to engage in, go through everyone with them, see who they feel comfortable with, and then go out and have conversations with people, after we vetted them, see who's genuinely interested in the project, assuming they're interested and they are genuinely engaged, then what we've seen in terms of getting them to stay kind of like on brand and on message, it's certainly a challenge. I don't know how much influencer marketing people do, but oftentimes these are young people who, this is their first job is creating content for YouTube, so they're not used to a lot of the formalities of briefs and so on. So what we've seen work best is kind of bring them into the fold and kind of do some sort of in-person activation, give them the access to the marketing team, ideally create something that's a combination of like education and entertainment. So the brand message and the brief, they're essentially getting immersed into in real time versus just reading something off a document. Because anybody can just shoot a brief over email across the table, and like that's not as impactful as like sitting down with someone. You hang out with somebody, you inevitably kind of want to do right by them, and that's how we've really seen us get the most traction and success in working with influencers.
Awesome. How about, like, do you guys, I know obviously Mashable has a ton of different channels and now is under a bigger umbrella with a lot of that. So in terms of coming with like, brand safety, I don't know if you would all work with influencers as well and kind of weigh that world.
In terms of influencers, we speak to the influencers. We go through the same sort of vetting process. We speak to them beforehand. Anything they pub comes through our approval first.
Yeah.
So in that way, we maintain that it's going to be quote unquote safe. I think the other part of that though is if you sign up to get a influencer, you are assuming a certain amount of risk, right? So and that's part of how you even get to push the envelope is assuming some sort of risk. If you know everything beforehand that is going to happen, it's very calculated and it comes across to the viewer in the same sort of way. So in that sense, it is vetted. We do have some sort of parameters, but we do let the clients and the brands that we work for know that, hey, you do have to allow for a room in order to get the best product possible.
Awesome.
And I think one thing along the lines, like I like thinking about it in terms of like, it's like a Venn diagram where like you need, a win is essentially when the creator has an awesome time and is genuinely enthusiastic, the brand gets their message across, and then the audience gets the content that they know and love. And it's like where those intersect is ultimately where it's a win for everyone. Because if something's off there, I mean, in particular, if the creator's not having a good time, the fans are going to see it and they get pissed off. And that's not a win for anybody.
Yeah.
But I think part of that is definitely the brand relinquishing a little bit of control, because it's hard to get an authentic message across when they're just, all constantly in approval mode of everything. And some brands get it, some brands don't. I mean, there are a lot of brands that I've worked with in the past that no matter how much they want to be cool and they want to work with an influencer that's cool and popular right now, they are not willing to bend, and really they just want an ad agency.
Yeah. Okay, so we won't name names, but I want to talk a little bit more about ideation about this all, and a part of that we have a video from you and the team on that. So I'm going to try to make this work. Okay, here we go. It's short.
So
trust
yeah,
me.
I mean, just to
do
set
you
it
wanna
up,
start?
just
go
to
for it.
set it up a little bit, we were asked by Cadbury. They wanted to revive one of their age-old products called buttons in the UK. And they wanted to push the envelope and do something different that had never been done before. And we put together this VR immersive experience for them called Memory Lane. And so the clip that I brought was basically the production of how we got to that point and got to a successful program with Cadbury. So just as an FYI.
Our campaign is all about shared moments of joy, and we know nowadays like all the parents have so many pictures of their kids on their phones, but actually you don't print a lot of scrapbooks anymore. We're really happy to launch now Memory Lane. This is the perfect tool to capture all those precious moments and showcase them in a beautiful environment.
Here we are in sunny Colchester in Trinity Street, where we're shooting a world's first 360 VR experience using some pretty new technology. We're trying to map in dynamic elements into the actual street, so a user can come along and put their own memories into our virtual memory lane.
So we're gonna do a 3D track of the shot, and in the VFX we're gonna replace the street with a CG street.
I think virtual reality is kind of perfect for the idea, because the idea is all about genuine moments. Virtual reality is so immersive that it's kind of the perfect way to help you relive those moments. It just takes it to another level.
What I'm really looking forward to doing with this is what we do after the shoot. We've got that feeling right from the street, but actually we want to grade this and sort of tone it to make it feel like somewhere you're looking back into your past with that lovely warm feeling inside.
And so one of the reasons why I thought to play this was because it gave kind of a, first, the relationships that we needed to have across their agency, the brand client, some of the technologists and directors, all coming together to put this idea in motion. And then the other thing is when you do push the envelope and do something different, there's a real production time that goes into it. And people think of digital and they're like, great, whip it up in 24 hours. And you're like, well, hold on. You want to recreate an entire, world for Memory Lane, this Memory Lane campaign, and it requires a significant amount of time and production to set it up. Yeah. So, I think digital sometimes gets held to different standards because it's quick and fast, and we need it tomorrow, or we need it yesterday, and you're like, we're still on the creative side of things, having to go through a creative process and put that production together. Yeah. So.
Well, walk me through a little bit of like what we didn't see when you talk about this idea of digital and you do it fast. I could imagine like that could have been a website or something that I could navigate through. It could have been a Pinterest board or something like that, but it wasn't. It was VR, which is not easy.
It was crazy, and what they wanted to do. We also handed out, the like cardboard goggles. We had apps to download on their phone, and when they did upload their pictures, it was an incredible experience. I didn't want to bore you with the 10-minute video, but it brought families together because they could actually go through this VR experience where they are walking down memory lanes with pictures of their children, the names of the shops or their kids or their grandparents or people that have passed away, and it was these emotional experiences that brought families together. And we got some great feedback from the mums who were really interested in this. They said that there was a massive uptick in brand love around Cadbury buttons. The store sales went up. The targeting and the messaging was over 163% above target. So the engagement element, and this is where content differs from just traditional, spots and dots and advertising, is there's a real engagement here. And when you're doing it right, your engagement numbers go through the roof, and you build that love. You build that trust with the consumers that you're trying to reach. Awesome. And that's not, I think that's it's really valuable right now in the world of programmatic and, bid modifying.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of the examples. Obviously I was there. I've been in part of awesome experiences like South by with Mashable House that work with awesome brands, and there's a lot of edgy stuff. Like any good examples in terms of like when you can walk me through like ideation where it went from something awesome to something even more awesome.
think we probably, before we get to the ideation, right, we should probably just talk about, in general, the creative process and how you set up a culture that breeds creativity. And one of the things that we often look for when hiring people is starting first with the individual and you being able to communicate or articulate what is your purpose, right? Not purpose, life purpose. I'm talking about your purpose within your industry. What is it that you're trying to accomplish, the goals that you're trying to reach? Then, based on that, what is your point of view? So what is your voice, right? So once you go from there, and your job then is to find a place where your beliefs actually mirror what it is that the company's beliefs are. Once you go there, you see that it is a culture already there trying to get out the same things. It goes back to what I was saying earlier. A lot of places say, hey, we want to strive for the best creative work. We want to create bold breakthrough work. We want to do this. In actuality, they might not actually live by those practices. So by seeing the actual reels, seeing the work they have, hearing them articulate in one sentence what it is that who they are and what they are about breeds that sort of creativity that you all are looking for, right? Once you get together, the work that you create, I'll say for me, was very different when I came to Mashable because having come from the advertising side, it was more compartmentalized and I was not aware. There was the creative department. There was the blah, blah, blah department, the blah, blah, blah. And everyone stayed in their lane. Once I became to a digital media company, I was like, okay, here's my idea. And then this creative technologist is like, oh, that's great. I got an idea too. And I'm like, oh. And I just wasn't used to that. And so seeing all of those different disciplines come together to create something, it was truly a collaborative experience. So all ideas usually start with brainstorm. My actual interview at Mashable started, I walked in the door and I sat in a room and there was a group of people and I'm thinking it was just gonna be a normal question answer sort of experience. Instead I sat down, they put an assignment up on the wall and we're literally, okay, let's have a brainstorm. And I'm like, wait, what? And I'm just like talking with all these people. I had no idea who they are, and we're just spitballing ideas. But it was not in a way that made it feel intimidating. It was more so like, hey, this is a culture, this is an environment where every idea counts, put it up on the wall, and let's vet through and see what actually works.
Yeah. Awesome.
So, I mean, I know
and after the interview, no, I'm glad you brought that up.
Okay.
And after the interview process, wasn't just like a dream. We're like, that's actually how it works.
That's how,
like,
yeah.
And in terms of like, you were talking about, Kathryn, of like, well, a client can step in and be like, oh, well, I don't like your whiteboard brainstorm.
But I think, I guess what helps a lot is having these conversations beforehand. Having the conversations with the brands, establishing that trust, goes back to the relationship I was talking about earlier. Like, it's not looked upon as, sure, I'm an art director, I'm a writer, I'm a creative strategist, I'm a content strategist, I'm a creative technologist. It's like, no, you are creating, but you're actually creating something of value. So once you add value to it, now there's actually a purpose, there's a meaning behind what it is that you're trying to do and accomplish, and it makes the whole ideation process a lot easier.
Cool, awesome. And in terms of, I mean, I know you're biased because you kind of run the company, but like, but it works, it's great, it's perfectly well run, everyone gets along, super innovative.
I wish I could claim credit for it. I'm really not doing the day-to-day so much anymore. But I agree with everything you guys said, and I just, to kind of tack on a couple of things, to your point about like clients coming in and, they want, there's an expectation with digital, we can do everything fast and it's all gonna be cheap. One thing I like to think about, and like, you always have to be kind of tactful in positioning this, but it always reminds me of like, it's really common, you see it in like design communities and stuff, you can pick 2 out of 3, fast, cheap, and good. And it's kind of true, like you're making trade-offs and compromises to do the work. And then to your point about the relationship, it's like, I was reading this article this morning, like, and 84% of agency pitches, I guess, are decided by the brand teams before the final pitch. Yeah. So it's like that trust and relationship is so key. And so there are all these like nuances and interpersonal kind of factors that go into creating great work before you even touch the work. That said, I'll top line our process very simply. At a high level, like we get a brief and what we'll do is basically hand it over to like planners and comm strategists, and planners inevitably do some research and they try and identify what are the jumping off points for great creative. So like what's the brand truth? What's the human truth? What's the cultural truth? Where are these like white spaces that we can kind of build on and create something, build out a creative platform that's unique? And then the comm strategists are kind of helping inform, like, hey, here's where these consumers are, how you can best reach them, what's resonating with them. And then from there, we brief out, all the teams that need to be in the loop. So, obviously creative and media and social, and then from there, bring in other, specific skill sets as needed. And then everybody, breaks off, comes together, kind of, it's a little bit nebulous. I mean, it's a creative process, and creative is very messy. But, we'll inevitably come together, review, work together. And I think, to your point, like, great ideas can come from everywhere, and I think we really try and embrace that as a culture, and it certainly helps. Because especially, in this space where platforms are always changing, you want to have ideas that are grounded in the realities of what's possible, and ideally in, pushing the envelope a little bit, and you're not just like stuck in, well, I've seen kind of this format work, let's just keep doing that. You want to be pushing the boundaries, and so the more you can kind of really seamlessly integrate a lot of skill sets, the better off you are.
Awesome. Well, in terms of platforms we were just talking about, I'm curious from your guys' perspective whether or not you really, when you're in the creative mode, think about what content you're going to create, or think about the platform, or is it like, is this like a chicken egg question? So maybe Kathryn, like, that example was VR. So like, were you like, we're going to do something in VR, or you're like, we're going to do a memory lane thing?
Well, I think similar like to the process, we kind of first start with the goals of the client that we're working with, because it all has to eventually be measured by them. And I think taking and having that conversation up front and understanding, okay, what do you care about? What are you trying to accomplish? How risk averse are you? If you have someone that's super risk averse, you're not going to do something like that. Yeah. If they're like, you know what, just go hog wild, great, we'll go crazy and come up with something really immersive. But I think it has to be, the distribution angle has to be thought of in the beginning, or has to be talked about in the beginning, I think, because to the point of, you want to create something that you can actually execute, and that someone will actually see. And I think all too often there's things that are created that you can't execute, and they're great ideas, but how the hell are you going to do them? And we don't have the platform to do it. So distribution and creative execution has to be thought of up front, so that you know who your audience is and what they want to see. So we're definitely doing both in the beginning.
Well, like, maybe to you, I know you said Mashable's like, looks at like a future perspective of that, and like, okay, we talked about earlier of like, when I think of future, I'm like, okay, VR, AR, like, so therefore is that like where, like, how do you make sure your creative team doesn't just jump to like the sexy pushing the envelope mediums, or do you?
So I was listening to Kathryn and saying, wow, maybe we should adopt that process. Because we literally start with content first, and then we think about distribution second, unless the brand and or client has asked for a specific medium or channel to begin with. But we usually start with the idea or the story that we're trying to tell, and then we then go by and think of what is the best platform by which to tell that story in terms of the audience and the target that they're trying to reach. And what was the other part of your question?
Well, so I was like, so then you answered it of like, you don't look at like, we should do VR and then do VR. You really think of the story.
Yeah, we think of the story, and then depending on the brand that we are working for, we involve other teams that might have expertise in those various areas, and would bring those to the table.
Awesome.
Yeah, and on our end, so we've got comms in the room who provides kind of that insight into, this is where you should, kind of the sandbox that you should be playing in terms of where to reach people. That said, inevitably, I mean, a big breakthrough idea is probably not necessarily going to come directly from data, and so more often than not, we go in with like a spectrum of ideas. There's the, usually 2 to 3, 1 or 2 are generally the, here's kind of a little bit more safe, here's a little bit edgier, and then here's the big out there idea. If you want to roll the dice, and we don't know how this is going to do, but it has the potential to be dramatically impactful, and that's where I think a lot of brands, more and more are building out kind of their budgets where it's like 70, 20, 10, like 70% is tried and true, 20% is more new, and then 10% is just experimental. And it's fun when you get them to bite off on giving you that 10% because you can learn a lot in the process, and I think it's every once in a while you get those.
So this is talking about, the big spend and the shift to digital. You mentioned earlier about, people just think it can shove up and everything's fast and easy. I, cover tech companies, and last week Snapchat reported their earnings where 95% of the ads on Snapchat are programmatic, as in just easy sells that any company, you and I could buy an ad right now and just put it up there.
Yeah.
And so in the space that you guys operate in, are you at all scared of all that money just being pushed further into that, or can we still rely on that, the 10% and the other budgets?
I think I think there's waves, and so brands that put more of their money on sort of that down, lower funnel activity media, eventually swing the pendulum back, because they can't just operate in any one bucket. They have to operate across the spectrum, because if you're only operating in the lower funnel, it's a race to the bottom. I mean, you're not building any credibility with the people that you're trying to reach, and then they're either just going to go off of price or whatever is easy and convenient. Yeah. There's no reason to buy you. There's no connection to those brands. So I think what I've seen is that the pendulum swings in both directions. I think for a while now it's been swinging to programmatic, and I think it'll swing back over the next year to upper funnel, middle funnel, emotional connections with people. I feel like that trend has already started, and it's definitely not going away.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Any disputes to that?
No, I 100% agree. The emotional connection has to be there.
Yeah.
A, I'll be out of a job if it's not. But B, it's if you look just at the world now, politics, entertainment, athletics, everyone in every single field is just an outpour of emotions.
Yeah,
I feel this way about this thing. So you have to have some sort of human connection in anything it is that you put out there. So programmatic's fine, but everyone's rebelling against this robotic state that that things were starting to go in.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree with all this. I will say though that I think programmatic is good from a macro perspective because one, it doesn't necessarily have to be solely, for the more CPA-driven lower funnel campaigns, although that's certainly, an ideal use case for it. I think where it's really interesting and helpful is it's an opportunity for us to leverage insights. I'm not a fan of kind of more of the traditional media buying agency structure. Historically, they've monopolized ad dollars and basically said hey, you give us, brand X, you give us all your money, and basically because we have so much scale, we can negotiate with, the TV networks and so on and get better rates. Programmatic really kind of starts to upend that and incentivizes people to not just set it and forget it. And I think that's really important because it's just lazy to throw something out in the world and then come back 6 months later and be like, here's how it did. When you can go and look at the data and make adjustments, 6 hours later, 6 minutes later. So I think it's really interesting and really helpful from that perspective.
And that is the beauty of digital.
Yeah, exactly.
Is
yeah,
that
totally.
adjustment on the fly? You can definitely
100%.
change things up.
Yeah, and I don't think also it's not necessarily going to, I think it'll help inform branded content as a whole. Hopefully more and more people will be leveraging those insights. I think, once again, I don't think your breakthrough ideas will necessarily be totally data-driven, but you're going to get incremental gains, which is really helpful. But also, people are just, using ad blocking software like crazy. So it's more and more important to actually create something, that is, generating an emotional connection and kind of lives outside, just display ads as a whole.
But I think all these activities do work together. So,
100%.
I think it's you build the emotional activity interaction with your customer so that when they have the choice or it is at that last click conversion, they choose you.
Yeah.
I mean, so they have to work together. And we've seen some preliminary data where we're trying to get what that relationship looks like. And it is definitely clear there is a relationship, to the point where, you know, it's hard. The attribution model is definitely hard, but we're figuring it out and trying to figure it out. And we've seen, even as early stages, like 118% lift in like searching for brands when they've done more of this, like an emotional connection with the
Yeah.
consumer. So, and that's, you know, the lower funnel activity where you're getting into search. So how do you partner this like content marketing with your search activity? That's pretty powerful.
Yeah.
It's just hard right now to prove it all out.
100%.
Yeah.
Last quick thing for you guys. I know in the description we have, oh, it's not up there, but in the description it talked about same old. And so we're now in 2018. I'm curious, if we're looking into the future, what's like the same old of the future based on right now? Like when right now would be pushing the envelope to do something. What are you seeing in the future that won't be cool anymore?
Do you want
Go
to
ahead, no, you go.
Well, I think a couple of things. Like one is, I think still so much of advertising is kind of a holdover or like a hangover from, you know, the TV era where like people are very campaign focused, and as a result we kind of are, we're not adopting those and incorporating those insights from like, you know, programmatic and so on. It's like, oh, we're going to invest a bunch into something really sexy, put it out in the world, walk away for 6 months, come back, do it again. And I think what we really need to transition to is more of this kind of cultivating a community focus. And the byproduct of kind of the more campaign focus is we're seeing ad formats kind of like, there's like this race to like, well, how quick, you know, can we get people through them because people don't watch ads? Like now it's like the 6-second ad format, like, you know, everybody's pushing that. And it's like, there's a lot of hype around people having this like, you know, total like ADD and they can't sit there and watch something. That's totally not true. I mean, people watch, you know, like YouTubers are doing like 30-minute vlogs. I mean, Joe Rogan has a 3-hour podcast, which is probably the biggest podcast on the planet. Kids sit there and watch 6 hours of Twitch streamers. Like, attention span is not the issue. Shitty ads are the issue. And like approaching it from like, well, how can we build trust? How can we think long term? And cultivating a sense of community is really the direction brands need to be taking things. And I think that's why so many of the direct-to-consumer brands that are startups have where they've kind of carved out a niche is, you know, they you know, are capitalizing on, you know, social and digital to build trust really quickly, build a dialogue with these brands or with these consumers, and they've been able to grow kind of using that more holistic approach versus like, we're going to spend a bunch of money, lob it out in the world, sit tight, and come back 6 months later.
Awesome. I know we're like pretty much out of time here, but no, that was, I liked your ad. It's not just shitty ads, yeah. But in like kind of wrapping up here, like anything to add beyond that?
I mean, I would add, just to like piggyback on what he said about the crappy ads, is, you know, we're getting more and more feedback now that the ads are crappy, because on digital you get immediate feedback.
Yeah.
People don't watch them, they skip them, they block them, they're doing all of these things. When you build an ad that informs someone, entertains someone, or educates them on something, they'll watch it.
Yeah.
And so again, you know, make better ads.
Yeah.
Awesome, better ads in the future.
Yeah.
This sounds great.
Yeah.
I'm excited. Anything to add on, Mike?
I just think, real quickly, the same old is a passive viewing experience. And I think more than ever, everything that we're creating needs to be active, it needs to be interactive, it needs to allow people to participate and feel some sort of ownership in whatever it is that you put out there.
Awesome. All right, I'm looking forward to the future. And thank you guys for participating today.
Thank you so much.
And I'm sorry we didn't have time for audience questions, but if anyone wants to come up, I mean, at least I'll be chilling. So, awesome. Have my coffee. All right, thank you, everyone.